Good afternoon. Welcome to the First Annual UM-Flint Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit. Thank you all for attending. My name is David Luke. My pronouns are he and him, and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer here at the University of Michigan-Flint. I am a young-ish cisgender multiracial man with short hair and a dark brown beard. I'm wearing a blue sport coat, a white shirt, yellow and blue bow tie with matching pocket square and a U of M-Flint lapel pin and black framed glasses. Our virtual background is blue with U of M-Flint Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the upper corner of the screen. The idea for this DEI summit is inspired in part by our colleagues at U of M Ann Arbor, who held their virtual summit on Monday, and hopefully some of you were able to attend. The basic outline for this session is shown on the screen. We'll begin with this welcome and land acknowledgement, followed by revisiting our campus vision and reminding us all of the 8 broad goals outlined in the DEI Strategic Action Plan. Then I've asked some of our many colleagues who are working on specific initiatives to speak about some of the work they're doing and highlight some of the positive movement. Finally, we'll end with a panel of former and current Chief Diversity Officers, featuring Chancellor Donna, Provost Feast Price, U of M Ann Arbor's Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer Rob Sellers, and me, and moderated by Professor Jan Furman, the DEI Committee Co-Chair. We are in the unique position at U of M-Flint to have a Chancellor and Provost who both have firsthand experience formally engaging in DEI work from the CDO role, and to welcome Dr. Sellers to the conversation as well, and I'm looking forward to that. So first, let's begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land the University of Michigan-Flint occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homeland of many indigenous nations, most recently the Anishinaabe, including Potawatomi, Chippewa, Ojibwe, and Ottawa tribal nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide, forced relocation, and removal of many from this territory, and we honor and respect the many indigenous people, including those of the Three Fires Alliance, who are still connected to this land. This slide might look familiar as I displayed this at the DEI Town Hall a little over a year ago, but I think it's important to revisit it now. The University of Michigan-Flint is a comprehensive urban university of diverse learners and scholars committed to advancing our local and global communities. As such an institution, diversity, equity, and inclusion are an integral part of our operation and our excellence. We know that successful DEI initiatives are integrated into the broader strategy. There's substantial research to back up this claim. Thus, as we continue to prioritize DEI and do so in an organized and strategic way, we are not only striving toward the goals of the DEI Strategic Action Plan, but advancing our university's strategic priorities to grow and stabilize enrollments, invest in people and programs, and promote innovation, all through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are working strategically to close retention rate gaps while raising overall retention rates and support our diverse student population and their unique needs through increased investment in advising, mentoring, and support. Further, through partnering with industry to identify needed skills in our labor market, U of M-Flint is positioned to address the skill mismatch contributing to joblessness and structural unemployment in Flint. I see this specifically through programs that will prepare our students for the economy they will graduate into, like many in the College of Innovation and Technology and in other areas as well. All of this while continuing to prioritize academic excellence, student-centeredness, and engaged citizenship. This list may and should indeed look familiar. These are the 8 goals developed through the DEI committee and in dialogue with our campus community outlined in our DEI Strategic Action Plan. All of the activities and initiatives highlighted today connect to one or more of these goals. We are seeking to increase the diversity of our students, faculty, and staff and administrative ranks through improved and deliberate recruitment strategies and through better retaining those who take classes and work here. Better retention suggests an improved climate, sense of belonging, and eliminating barriers and obstacles that differentially impact different populations. We will soon have our campus on a 3-year climate survey process and use those results to inform our continued efforts to become more inclusive, equitable, and diverse. We are working on ways to support faculty in infusing DEI into curriculum and research, while encouraging and promoting professional development opportunities to better equip us to do this. Hopefully, as we zoom in a bit and talk about some of the specific initiatives underway, you'll be able to see what some of this looks like more clearly. In the last year, we've had several significant updates on DEI. First, in October 2020, the DEI Strategic Action Plan was adopted. This was significant in that the plan was produced by the DEI Committee in dialogue with the campus community pre-COVID, and was introduced to the campus and adopted during the summer of 2020. Additionally, $500,000 of support came from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor to support DEI and our related recruitment, retention, and graduation goals. Next, the Flint Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion was established along with the permanent Chief Diversity Officer position, institutionalizing our commitment to continuing this work and providing an administrative location for it. Even more impressive are the many initiatives underway happening throughout campus. I'm asking some of our colleagues to join me in talking about some of the good work that's happening now. I'll begin by inviting Jerry Alexander from the Office of Educational Opportunity Initiatives to talk about building pipelines in Flint. Jerry?
Thanks for that, Dr. Luke. So to better support building pipelines in Flint, the Student Connection Ambassador initiative was introduced. This is a DEI, admissions, Center for Educator Preparation, and EOI collaboration stemming from the DEI strategic plan. So the goal is to hire 4 students, and they will be housed in EOI and work in an outreach capacity for about 20 hours a week. The purpose of this position is to recruit, retain, and graduate more students from the Flint community, also to create a pipeline of students enrolling at UM-Flint, and lastly, to connect local students to UM-Flint's resources to help eliminate barriers while highlighting support opportunities. So the SCA role entails providing resources and helpful information to students, highlighting the resources and multi-layered support that we offer so that prospective students can see themselves as a successful student with a sense of belonging here at the University of Michigan-Flint. To facilitate educational opportunities to facilitate educational workshops on various topics around prep and success. And lastly, to share personal success stories to relate to prospective students and encourage them to consider UM-Flint as a viable college choice. So the outreach locations are all of Flint's high schools in the surrounding area, which include Flint Southwestern, the Accelerated Learning Academy, Carmen Ainsworth, Beecher, Mott Middle College, Genesee Early College, and Hamady, also including Flint Promise affiliated high schools and GED programs.
Thank you, Jerry.
No problem.
Now I'd like to move on and invite Beth Manning to talk about some of the work happening in human resources.
Thanks, David, and thank you for everyone for attending today. So, of course, I have a few things to be excited about in HR that we're working on, and I'll try to keep to 2 minutes time to keep everything moving along. The first one is about recruiting and advertising efforts. So in November, we will be adding in Data People software to our campus, which is fantastic. This has been a software package that some of the areas in Ann Arbor have used. And what it provides is a way for us to more broadly advertise. It takes usually 45 to 80 seconds for somebody to look at a posting and say, yes, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. So we're trying to make sure that we really appeal more broadly to folks. And what they found in Ann Arbor on the research is that we're getting more qualified and diverse candidates by using this Data People software. So we're really excited to bring that on in November. Additionally, we have Skill Survey, which is a tool that provides for reference checking, not by phone. It's by an electronic capture. It allows the anonymity for all of the pieces of the capture of the information. It allows us to customize the questions to the specific job. We're also doing continuing our compensation benchmarking, which we do every 3 to 4 years. So we're almost complete with that. We're also in their standard job postings, we've branched out, and the university in general has also added several additional areas, Glassdoor, higher ed, all of the ones that you see here. Indeed, those are free of charge. They grab from our postings and they recruit and just head over to these other areas. But in addition, we also are looking at more discipline-specific job boards. So for example, we have the vice provost position that's open enrollment management. So we're broadening that out to those specific areas. We're also looking at specific diverse types of publications. So we're continuing to add and populate to our ability, our resources for these sourcing tools. In our job postings, we're being more progressive about the job postings and the advertisements and to appeal to a wider audience. So you will see us when we're working with you, we will be working with you on more of those. In addition, our posting to hire processes we're trying to more streamline, be more efficient, be more inclusive and retention and focused. We're partnering with some folks in Ann Arbor on their recruiting tools and kind of collaborating. We can no longer just send a posting up and expect to get hundreds of applicants. That's not how it works anymore. We have to be more intentional about our searches and our reach outs. So then, of course, we standardized our search committee guidelines for staff and faculty. You can find them up on our web pages. So we're trying to be more inclusive there. And then finally, the last two areas I want to talk about is onboarding. So in the next month or two, you will be hearing from us. We are working with stakeholders across the campus to work at it, a more development, more of a robust type of onboarding process that includes not just HR specific, but other area specific, so we can work as a team and really be that welcoming, inviting, inclusive, and make sure people have what they need and who to go to when they hire on board, especially living in more of a virtual world. That's really critical. And then the last one is the exit and stay interviews. While we've had exit interviews for a while, we also are introducing stay interviews. So when we talk to people on campus, what makes people stay? What should we be repeating to have people stay? What are those key elements that we need to continue to offer and to have, or what are additional things we can have to have people stay and the retention there? So those are exciting pieces in HR. I'll stop there. I have a million more things to talk about, but I will stop there. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Beth. I now want to invite Diamond Wilder from the Office of Educational Opportunity Initiatives and Chris Dewey from Student Involvement and Leadership to talk about the Success Mentorship Program.
Thanks, David. Diamond, you're muted.
I was rambling on. Sorry, everybody.
You're good.
I'll start over. Hi, everyone. It's great to have so many people here today to listen in and learn about the exciting DEI initiatives taking place on campus. As David mentioned, my name is Diamond Wilder. I work in the Department of Educational Opportunity Initiatives, and I am the staff lead for the Success Mentorship Program. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Chris Dewey as we work together to implement and grow this exciting campus program. So the Success Mentorship Program, in partnership with Mentor Collective, launched late August. Mentor Collective has been known to assist in building high impact culture of mentorship on college campuses across the country. So prior to our partnership with Mentor Collective, the Success Mentorship Program started as just a pilot program during the winter 2021 semester. The impact from that pilot essentially left us with even more realization of how important mentorship is, serving as an essential component to a successful student experience. And one of our main goals here is to essentially start to shift the culture of mentorship on campus using best practices through one, defining what mentorship actually looks like at U of M-Flint. Some may think of networking, but when we speak about mentorship, we are talking about building relationships in a more concrete way, which leads me to two, empowering our students to build meaningful relationships with their peers, taking part in a supportive community, and developing key skills. So this mentorship program serves as a purpose to foster the student achievement and well-being through building intentional peer-to-peer relationships with a focus on engaging freshmen and new transfer students. Our student mentors work with their mentees to provide advice, guidance, and support as mentees essentially build effective communication and study skills and navigate their first year at U of M-Flint. Our Success Mentorship Program essentially aims to provide students with a sense of belonging and a purpose at U of M-Flint. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Chris to discuss pieces on student engagement and campus partnerships.
Thanks, Diamond. As we began our conversations and developed the pilot, we wanted to make sure that we had a good theoretical focus. And so we looked at a lot of the work from Terrell Strayhorn and Dr. Tinto to be able to inform the work moving forward. And as we did some benchmarking of similar programs that we wanted to look at peer institutions, Mentor Collective really stood out, mostly for those average results that you see there on the screen. The increase of retention that they saw in their metadata across multiple campuses and the impact on MELT when integrating that in the recruitment process were things that we're really excited about. We've already seen some great interactions with some of our partners. We worked really closely with the School of Management to get this kicked off this year and are onboarding additional partners as we go. We've already had over 87 students who are current upper division students paired as mentors with our students, and 205 have volunteered to step up in that role. And so that has been paired with 261 of our first year and transfer students, as Diamond mentioned. Our initial goal was 225 for this year based on our incoming student class, and so we've already exceeded that. So far we've already seen over 3,000 peer-to-peer text messages, over 600 conversations logged, and of those, 73% of our pairs have logged a conversation in the last 30 days. So we know that our students are interacting through this platform, and it's been really helpful to be able to see that and really think about what that means. Specifically, as we think about our students at the margin and how that impacts them as we look at the research and belonging and retention for our students from marginalized identities, we wanted to be able to highlight a couple of the key pieces in terms of identity of the students that are interacting in the program. So I'll kick it back to Donna.
As we look a little bit closer at our demographics, for our underrepresented minority population, and again, this information regarding ethnicity and gender is self-reported, so just keep that in mind. For our mentee cohort, we have about 5.1% that reported as multicultural, 4.7% as Hispanic Latino, 12% Black African American, 3.4% Asian American, 26% did not provide that information. However, roughly with those who did self-report, 25% of our mentee cohort make up underrepresented minority population. For our mentors, we have about 0.49% that reported as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, 6.8% is multicultural, 2.4% is Hispanic Latino, 12% is Black African American, 3.4% is Asian American, 32% did not provide that information. And again, roughly 25% of those who did report make up that underrepresented minority population. And just digging a little bit deeper when we look at those underrepresented minority mentee and mentor cohorts, we have about 9% of match mentors that make up first generation that also reported as underrepresented minorities, and about 14% of those that underrepresented minority mentor cohort reported as first generation. And I'll just go to the next slide, and we're going to look at gender. So in regards to our mentees, 65% mentees identified as female, 23% identified as male, 2.3% identified as non-binary, and 10% did not provide any data. As far as our mentors, 66 mentors identified as female, 20% identified as male, 0.98% of our mentors identified as non-binary, 13% did not provide any data. So I just want to keep this in mind. Although this does not cover all the identity variables for our participants, we felt that this information was relevant to share in a DEI lens. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to updating campus as we continue to collect the significant data, grow, and build a culture of mentorship at UM-Flint. David, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you both. Now I would like to invite Professor Stephanie Viday Helderloos to talk about some of the work that we're doing to ensure that our website is accessible to more people who speak different languages. Stephanie?
Thank you. So yes, I'm Stephanie Viday Helderloos. Because of that kind of mouthful, my students generally refer to me as Mrs. G or Professor G. I wear many hats here on campus, but two I'm the most proud of currently are my position on the DEI committee and being faculty advisor for LUNA, our Latino student organization. But enough about me. Today, I'm here to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about, and that's about our website translation. The website translation really speaks to some of those goals that we set up that David already mentioned. For example, identify and eliminate barriers and obstacles to success. I know many of you know that the application process for college is extremely complicated. Students have to decide where they're going, what program they want to be in. They have to figure out how to apply for financial aid, all of those deadlines, admissions, the essays, then housing. I mean, all of it is extremely complicated. And I was just recently going through this process with my own daughter, Sophie, and it occurred to me during this process that many of our students are doing all of this complicated stuff on their own as 17-year-olds, in high school. And many of these, I'm referring to those whose parents perhaps aren't native speakers of English. And I do understand that our students do speak English, but not having that website, all the information, all the deadlines, everything available in other languages deprives the parents of these students of the opportunity to have a role in their students' education, but it also deprives the students of the wisdom and insight of their parents when making these great decisions and navigating this complex process. And I thought that was so unfair and was a real obstacle to success. In addition to removing barriers to success, I think also the website translation sends a message that relates to another one of our goals. I think it promotes a sense of belonging at the institution and improves the campus climate. I think it shows that we really care about the populations we serve and that we are devoted to diversity. As things have been coming together really quickly over the past couple of weeks, even this slide that I made last week is already a little behind, I guess, so I'll update it as I go along. So it says at present we're deciding what languages to include, and with information from the alphabet soup of CGE, DEI, ODE, ITS, admissions, and graduate programs, we kind of came up with a list. So we have decided, we have a list of 18 languages. And I'm just going to read these to you in alphabetical order really quickly. Arabic, Bengali, Chinese, French, Gujarat, Hindi, Igbo, Japanese, Korean, Marathi, Nepali, Portuguese, Punjabi, Russian, Spanish, Telugu, Urdu, and Yoruba. So those are the 18 languages. Very soon as we can get it all handled, ITS gets it all ready to go, we will implement a plugin that is going to translate our website pages via a drop-down menu. The drop-down menu, to avoid like listing 18 options, to make it a little more, I guess, pretty. I don't know, that's not the right word, easier to use. We've chosen five languages that will drop down, and then there'll be another option that says other languages, which will take to the other 13. All of the languages were selected, keeping in mind our needs, but also giving that nod of, you're welcome here. We see you. We want you to be here. So some of the 5 languages in the drop down are things you might expect: Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, as to recognize our local population as well as our current student population. In the future, I would love to see this go further, to have some translations in material handed out at admissions events so that students could go home to their families with these kinds of things as well. But that's for another day. Although the website is not perfect, it uses neural translation system, which is more accurate than the regular machine translation. And we will have local, when possible, translators to check and verify the website, as need arises and as budget permits. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now I'd like to invite Dean Donna Fry of the College of Health Sciences to talk about how they're working to infuse DEI in the curriculum.
Good afternoon. From the College of Health Sciences, I have to say that our journey started a little bit before even looking at our curriculum. About 4 years ago, we started looking at our admissions processes and converting our admissions processes across the college to be more holistic. We sought help and guidance from the University of Michigan Medical School on that, and most of our processes for admissions have now been modified. Then in the summer of 2020, our leadership was in a retreat, and a statement came out from our county health board stating that racism is a public health crisis. And while we have done some work in this area, we have not done enough. And so we recognized that and decided that we needed to add some content to our curriculum about this specific topic so that our students would be better educated. And along the way in our planning on the curriculum, we realized, well, we can't ask our faculty across the college to teach what they themselves may not understand. Much of our faculty looks similar to me. I'm a white female, and a white female raised in the middle class out in the suburbs. And that's probably true of many of our faculty. And so we needed to step back and look at training ourselves first. And so I contacted David Luke to see if he could assist us with that. So over the course of winter semester 2021, I committed faculty meeting time every month to implicit bias training. And then we also did an additional training. Our entire tenure and clinical track faculty, as well as all of our staff, were invited to those trainings, and we had great participation. And I have to say that David was an excellent presenter, facilitator of those discussions, and helped us in a very non-threatening way to look at some of our own biases, both at a personal and professional level. And so that was very helpful. So that led up to our ability then to focus our retreat in May of last year on what do we need to do with the curriculum across the College of Health Sciences, so in all of our various programs. And the faculty developed a list of 5 areas they wanted to work on. The curriculum is listed on the right side of this slide. These are areas that we decided we would develop modules, learning modules on. And these modules are currently under development. We have 3 of the modules that have been developed, and the other 2 modules are being worked on this fall. And then what we are doing is we decided, because we're all researchers, right? We wanted to research the impact of implementing a curriculum. And so as part of that, we're also developing a research project to go along studying this to see if implementing this will actually have any impact on our students. So we're in the process of doing that. The other thing that this curriculum meets is the need of our faculty and our students who have licensure requirements for education in this topic area. And so we're aligning these with the requirements for continuing ed credits in this area, so that all of our faculty and staff can benefit from that, or faculty and students. So we're in the process still of that curriculum development. We decided that we needed train the trainer sessions. So I contacted all of the content developers who are experts on the various topics. I've contacted them so that they will do train the trainer sessions for our faculty. And I haven't talked to you about this, David, but we're implementing that in our faculty meetings so that we can reach the most people with those sessions. And then we will begin implementing the curriculum over the span of the coming year. So it's a work in process, and I can say as a coordinator of this work that we did not know everything up front in terms of process. So we're building the process as we go and learning a lot from it. And we are very fortunate in our community to have expertise in this topic area. Most of the curriculum is being developed by some of our LEO faculty members who are content experts. David Luke is developing one of the modules, and then we have an external community member developing another. But there are great resources around our community to help us advance this part of our curriculum.
Thank you, Dean Fry. Next, I would like to invite Samara Howe, the director of the Center for Gender and Sexuality, to talk a bit about creating safer spaces.
Thank you, David. So for the past 3 years, the University of Michigan-Flint has partnered with NASPA's Culture of Respect initiative. With one of over 30 college campuses and universities, the University of Michigan-Flint campus worked to develop their approach to sexual violence prevention and awareness. Through the Center for Gender and Sexuality and our campus partners, we've been able to provide confidential support services and referrals to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. In addition, our campus has provided prevention education programming led by our peer education program to deliver both our sexual violence prevention and healthy masculinity certificates. Although the Culture of Respect initiative will conclude at the end of this year, we have developed a new and expansive program called Creating Safer Spaces to address sexual violence concerns from an intersectional lens, recognizing that sexual violence and harassment are experienced in some of our most vulnerable populations, including undergraduate women, transgender and gender non-binary students, and male-identified students. In the next slide, you will hear from one of our student peer educators who will share definitions around consent. And these videos were designed as introductions to the Creating Safer Spaces initiative, which I think is really poignant, especially during this time of October, given this Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Hey y'all, so we are back with another video, and this time we are talking about consent. So exactly what is consent, you might ask? Consent can be described by the university's sexual misconduct policy as clear, freely given, and unambiguous agreement to engage in a particular activity. And with that, there are rules and conditions to consent. For consent to take place, it must be verbal, there must be enthusiasm, it must be mutually agreed upon, each party must be sober, and it has to be voluntary. You may be wondering, when can someone cannot consent? Someone cannot consent when they are under the age of 16, if they are intoxicated, if they are unconscious, or if the other party holds authority. Why is that important to learn about consent? Any sexual activities performed without explicit consent is considered sexual assault. Additionally, the absence of no is still not consent. If you want to learn more, request the peer educators to facilitate our consent workshop, where you can learn more in depth about what classifies as consent and how to ask for it.
Thank you. And now David's going to share more information around other initiatives that we're leveraging through DEI.
Thank you, Samara. So we have a number of other initiatives designed to leverage our collective expertise. Through the DEI Initiative Grants Program, we are providing financial support for some of the great ideas and proposals that have come from throughout the organization. Some of the proposal titles are listed here, and their details are available on the DEI website. Proposals are evaluated by the DEI committee based on the criteria in the call for proposals, primarily their alignment with the DEI Strategic Action Plan goals and their plan for sustainability after the initial seed funding is exhausted. We've also recently introduced Programming for Inclusive Excellence funds for university offices or departments who are considering DEI programming. They can apply for matching funds up to $2,000. This is a way to incentivize units that might not be explicitly DEI related to begin thinking about programming around DEI for their students, faculty, and staff. A few years ago, I attended a presentation in one of Professor Kingsley's chemistry courses by someone who worked in inclusion and diversity for Dow Chemical. Much of the content resonated with me in terms of thinking about DEI and organizational change, and what this individual did to make the importance of DEI matter to chemistry students specifically was incredibly valuable. One can imagine how DEI programming that's related to specific academic areas may resonate differently among our students, faculty, and staff. It's our hope that through Programming for Inclusive Excellence, or PI funds, we'll see more of these types of activities bubbling up throughout campus. Our DEI Scholarship Spotlight, announced recently via email, in conjunction with the Urban Institute for Racial, Economic, and Environmental Justice, is another effort to enhance our collective knowledge and understanding. I sent out a call for faculty to fill out a Google form with an abstract or summary of some of the research they've done. So if you haven't submitted your research, please do that. The intent is to have lunch and learn style sessions where faculty can present their research related to any aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we can benefit from the expertise that we have on campus. We know that academia is too often siloed, and potential interdisciplinary collaborators may find one another through the spotlight. Additionally, as we seek to provide more professional development opportunities for our faculty and staff related to DEI, I think we should certainly look at what knowledge and expertise we already have that we might be unaware of. We are also working in conjunction with the Center for Gender and Sexuality, Human Resources and Facilities to provide better access to information about lactation rooms, all gender restrooms, and accessible restrooms, assessing where we currently are and looking at ways to improve, including through renovations, and creating the first multi-stall all gender restroom on campus adjacent to the Center for Gender and Sexuality. Finally, I've been working with business engagement to offer a short course and professional development sessions for community members and organizations like 100K Ideas, Flint and Genesee Group, and the Mott Children's Health Center. These sorts of opportunities provide our community partners with opportunities to learn and grow with us. They generate revenue for the university, and they will generate more opportunities and improve university community relations. I recently gave a presentation at the Mott Children's Health Center, and they expressed an interest in some of the workshops that are offered through the Center for Gender and Sexuality. So my hope is that through this first workshop, it leads to more opportunities for the university to engage with community partners in this way. As the DEI work continues, we're being deliberate about consistent campus communication. We want to continue the dialogue as we identify and leverage best practices for becoming a leader in DEI among regional institutions. We continue to utilize funding from Ann Arbor to support our DEI and RRG initiatives. While DEI is an institutional priority that will be supported, we will be proactive in seeking external funding opportunities through grant applications, philanthropy, and other avenues for revenue generation. And the DEI committee will transition to an advisory role, as mentioned in my email this morning. Nominations are currently being accepted, so if you're interested, please nominate yourself or someone you know who would be great for the committee. Finally, beyond the DEI committee, we're always looking for new ideas and feedback for ways to improve along our DEI journey. We know that as we push toward a broader goal of culture change, progress can sometimes be frustratingly nonlinear. I find myself encouraged by the updates today and by deliberately paying attention to our progress. The scope of the work can be daunting, but we are making strides, and the changes we're making will positively impact how our diverse students, faculty, and staff and community members experience U-of-M-Flint. So while this summit is focused on communicating some of the good work that we're doing to our campus community, we're always accepting constructive feedback and suggestions on ways to get better. Please don't hesitate to stop by my office. I'm in 217 USEN in between the Center for Gender and Sexuality and the Center for Global Engagement. Send me an email, send an email to the office email that's listed above, and I'm happy to arrange an in-person or virtual conversation as needed, and appreciate the commitment of so many people throughout this institution to the work of diversity and equity and inclusion, which is truly a campus commitment. Now to transition to the next phase of the DEI Summit, which is a Chief Diversity Officer panel, moderated by none other than Professor Jan Furman, Professor Emeritus of English, DEI Committee Co-Chair, and Executive Director of the Urban Institute for Racial, Economic, and Environmental Justice. The panelists beside me will include our Chancellor, Deba Dutta, who served as Provost and Chief Diversity Officer at Purdue, our Provost, Dr. Sandra Feast-Price, who served as Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Kentucky, and Rob Sellers, who will continue serving as Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan-Ann Arbor through August 2022, as they conduct a nationwide search for someone to fill his sizable shoes. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kindly ask the panelists to turn their cameras on and turn things over to Jan.
Again, a warm, very warm welcome to the panelists. I really appreciate your willingness to come together this afternoon to share your considerable experience, your considerable insight. I cannot imagine actually a more relevant group of leaders, certainly for this summit, this UM-Flint Summit. And even for, I was thinking earlier, this historical moment, when it seems to me the whole world is laser focused in a way that it has never been on issues related to social justice. So perfect timing, excellent committee, and again, a big thank you. As moderator, I do have prepared questions, but I invite you to move the discussion beyond my questions. Perhaps you have questions of your own, perhaps you have questions of each other. The goal this afternoon is, I would say, a conversation that is engaging and that is thoughtful. So, question number one, and I'm going to change my view so that I can have the gallery view. Question number one is a bit biographical in nature. I'm a humanist. I believe in the persuasive power of personal narrative and storytelling. So my question for you is, how did you come to this DEI work? You know, has this been a lifelong pursuit? Did it come through professional development? What is your story? What's the path? What has been that journey? Chancellor Donna.
Yes, so Jan, let me first begin by thanking you, thanking David, and the entire DEI committee. So everyone, you just heard Jan say that I'm a humanist. I believe in the persuasive power of narratives. Well, I'm an engineer and I believe in the powers of persuasion. And a little story here, because all of this that began with a conversation between Jan and I in this office right here, when I explained my thoughts to Jan and I asked her, Jan, would you please be willing to chair the DEI committee? And Jan, as thoughtful as she is, she said, I'll think about it. And then the word came, no, I don't have time. Jan is busy. I knew that all along. Jan is busy, highly respected on campus. But that's where the power of persuasion, I said, no, we are not going to take a no. Please go and say to her this. Long and short, Jan agreed. So Jan, I am very, very grateful to you. And then Jan took the leadership role and David came along, who I knew a little bit. And then a committee, a very inclusive, large committee was formed campus-wide early January of 2020. And then soon the pandemic hit and we entered the Zoom world. But the reason why I wanted to share this, this little bit of history is, look how much has been accomplished. It is really amazing to the work that the two of you have done as co-chairs and the committee, the entire committee of 25 people, I believe. So what is most encouraging to me is the untapped potential I still think there is on this campus beyond the 25 who have stepped forward. So while I thank the committee and both of you, I know there are more people on this campus who are eager to step forward and be a part of this journey. So hats off to you, my gratitude to you. And now to your question, I came into this, I was the graduate program chair in mechanical engineering as a faculty in Ann Arbor. Prior to that, I was a regular faculty doing research, having graduate students of my own, not thinking much about it. But when I became graduate program chair in the department, very large department, 400 graduate students in general, that is when I started to look deeper and understand, read some materials about it. And then I started certain programs that were focused on diversity and inclusion. Okay, these were the two areas. I would see a lot of international students, minority students in the program, but not a part of the graduate community. The inclusion was never even a topic. I'm talking 25 years ago, right? And then I got the opportunity to go to the National Science Foundation in Washington, D.C. I worked there for 3 years, and that changed my entire outlook. At National Science Foundation, they do not apologize. They just go on and do the work. So as a program director, I used to take the work, the recommendations that came through from panelists, and then per NSF's guidance of broadening participation, we would remove proposals that we felt did not meet the goals of broadening participation and add proposals. So it gave me a new perspective at the national level. You know, at the local level, you hear, well, you know, we go for quality only, and you heard that stuff, right? Well, you go to NSF, yeah, we go for quality too. But broadening participation to include women and minorities in the STEM fields is a foundation goal. And that goal is met through every program director looking very carefully at the portfolio that comes from the panels and then making decisions about which one to fund. So after that, I came back to Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I was a very different guy. I knew that I had seen how it is done, and I wanted to make a difference. And then after that, I became a dean and a provost and so forth. It stayed with me. So that's my personal journey.
Rob, perhaps?
Sure.
If you will.
Sure. First, let me just start off by saying how really excited and honored I am to be on this panel and to be here celebrating the great work that you are doing in Flint. And it is inspirational, and my hat is off to you. For me, the DEI work was in my DNA. So my parents, as long as I can remember, had always instilled in us and modeled in us the notion of broadening access, broadening opportunity. My father was a Presbyterian minister. My mother was a nurse by profession. But they were extremely active in the communities that they were in. Father was in NAACP, a number of other community organizations. Mother founded a community health center in the neighborhood that she grew up. And even as a kid, I remember going to meetings with the community and listening to strategizing and efforts to change structures and to provide opportunities for folks who have historically not had those opportunities. So I learned about structural racism before we were calling it structural racism and other forms of structural oppression. And so one of the things that they taught me was basically two lessons. One, and these lessons were based on the fact that I always knew that I was incredibly fortunate that whatever success that I had on one level was deserved because you're going to have to work for it. On the other level, to always understand that while you might have had that success, chances are there are others who are even better than you that never got the opportunity. And so you had a responsibility to give back to those who came before you and gave you that opportunity for success. And part of that is being successful. And then the other part of that was to make sure that wherever you went, that you made that place better for those who are like you, so that more can have the opportunity to come through as you move forward in life. So it's basically been throughout my life, what we now call DEI was just simply a family legacy.
So I'd like to share as well. And I want to begin by saying thank you to David for this opportunity. And thank you to Jan for serving as our moderator. And I am privileged to be a part of this really distinguished panel. As it relates to my identities, African-American woman from the Deep South, namely Louisiana, first generation college graduate, Pell eligible, born and raised in a rural community, and all of those identities shape who I am. And I will say that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is not what I do, it is who I am, it is in my DNA. It is the way in which I navigate the world and make sense of the world. And so remembering my father in some of my earliest recollections when he would fight against discrimination and oppression, I was thinking this morning about one of my most vivid recollections. In my little small town, there was a little store, and they were petitioning and rallying for David Duke. And David Duke was like one of the lead Klansmen in the country. And I can just remember the ways in which my little town galvanized to fight David Duke coming to our little town, as well as they shut down the little store that many of the people in the communities would frequent. But those early life experiences regarding diversity, regarding inequities, discrimination, help to inform the ways in which I navigate the world. And for me, I'm always thinking of who is left out, who's on the margins, and making sure that I use my voice and the privilege in which I have to make sure that people that are on the margins are front and center, and they're given a voice and their issues are recognized and heard.
So I'll respond next, although I'm mostly interested in listening to the other folks. For me, similarly, this has been sort of something that my family has a long history with, and that I grew up, I think, thinking of my own identity as a multiracial person who presents as racially ambiguous. I have spent a lot of time thinking about my experiences in different spaces. So predominantly white school, predominantly white church, predominantly African-American spaces. And I've always had an interest in bringing people in and how people are experiencing a space and being aware of that. And I think this is one of the things that drew me to studying sociology, was it gave me tools and language to understand situations that I was sort of grappling with already. And it informs my approach to the work now, in that we look at individuals' experiences as part of broader patterns, and that's how we can get towards reforming institutions and creating change that will make things better. So, I think the other thing is that in engaging in this work, I become more aware of areas where I hold privilege. So I think the work is constantly thinking and empathizing with folks who may be experiencing this place in a very different way than I do. And that's it's a big responsibility, but it's an important one that I take very seriously.
So let's come back to the institution, to higher education. Each of you have seemed to be able to integrate the personal and the professional. That seems to be a core of your identity in this DEI space. Is that the recommendation then for everyone in the institution to find a way for that kind of integration, or is there, are there multiple, I guess, paths to DEI work in higher education? Or does one have to be, does one have to inherit a legacy, I suppose, and then marry that legacy to one's profession? Or can you start anywhere and find a place to contribute?
So what I will begin by saying is that I never wanted to be a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. And I will admit that with a lot of trepidation, I vacillated about owning the work, the role. But the reality in higher ed, particularly at predominantly white institutions, is that for some African Americans particularly, I'm sorry, allergies, as well as other minoritized identities, oftentimes when we seek leadership positions, that is the position that is made readily available. And so I just have to put that out there because that is real. And the fact is that far too many of my particularly African American colleagues, they assume the role of DEI officer simply because that is the academic administrative position for which they are given. But also while saying that, there are also those that aspire to be leaders in this work. They want to own the title of DEI officer. And so I want to recognize that as well. But for me, it's like, you know what? If not this, then what? I do the work. I have always done the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a social justice advocate. I am a change agent. And that goes without saying, no matter what job I'm doing, I do the work of DEI. But I was very, very hesitant because there are times when you get typecasted as a result of doing this work. I wanted to be a provost. I have aspirations of one day becoming a president or a chancellor. And unfortunately, the position of DEI officer sometimes limit your trajectory. And I applaud my colleagues that are faced with entering to this work, and they ascend to positions of provost. And I'm happy that I am representing this university as provost. And I also see colleagues that ascend to positions of presidency or chancellor as a result of the work.
Anyone else? You addressed that so eloquently. My question was a little muddled, but that's essentially what I'm wondering. Does social identity prepare one? Is the expectation that social identity makes one a better CDO than perhaps not?
That's an interesting question. I'd love to try to address that too. So I believe strongly my social identity influences the way in which I do the work. So it gives me an advantage in some ways, But if I fall into the trap of believing that it automatically makes me right, then and that is the trap. So one of the things that it does get, I think, being a member of a minoritized identity in this society inherently gives you experiences of being the other, of not being central. And I think a fundamental aspect of this work is being able to decentralize, to perspective take, to recognize that oftentimes what gets framed as the right way or the one way or the most important way is really a matter of perspective. And I see as one of my major responsibilities as Chief Diversity Officer is to make sure that in whatever room I'm in, that other voices and not just my voice as a African-American cisgendered now middle-aged male, I know that's hard for me, able-bodied, somewhat able-bodied male, but to try to at least not speak for, but make sure that those other voices and perspectives are part of the conversation. And so having been in a society where I had to experience the world as other has helped me in that particular space. And I would argue has helped me in all the work that I've done, my work as a professor, my work before as a department chair. I do believe the ability to perspective take, to empathize, to step back is one of the most important skills that any administrator, regardless of their space, and I would argue just about any profession can have. So I do think that that is helpful. For me, I've been fortunate. As I mentioned earlier, DEI has been my life, and it was not framed in the context of DEI. And I've had the good fortune of being able, every job that I've taken in my professional life has been a job that I deeply value and care about. But for me, I was never, my focus was never on particular roles. Each role if you'd have asked me as soon as 2 weeks before taking the position, whether I would take it or not, I would say there's no way in heck. But in those, I got a chance to see that there were things that I wanted to do and that I could do in the roles. And so that was the reason why I ultimately took the position. So I think our social identities can help us in any number of different roles in a number of different ways. And that is actually the secret with regards to why DEI is so important, not only in higher education, but in larger society, is that if we aren't more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, then we are missing out on those perspectives that lead to better decisions, better opportunities. And it's not just the folks that have traditionally been minoritized and traditionally been disenfranchised who suffer. We do suffer and suffer disproportionately, but the larger group suffers as well.
It does sound as if one has to sometimes navigate that path of personal ambition on the one hand and service to community on the other. And maybe that is more incumbent upon one who's in the kinds of leadership positions you all are in than in some others, I wonder. Can you make the case for the importance of DEI in higher ed. I've heard each of you speak with conviction about the importance, of DEI generally, globally. But what about higher ed? Does it play a particular special role in higher education?
So let me share my views. It'll also speak to the previous question. So as I mentioned in my opening, that I started deeply thinking about DEI when I became the grad chair in mechanical engineering in Ann Arbor. And then I used to read a lot of material, knowing fully well that I am an immigrant. I don't have the experiences that native English speakers and Americans have who I'm dealing with. So I used to read a lot. And I remember this, I didn't quite read the full book, but I was reading pieces of it in a different article. John Dewey. John Dewey, for those who care, used to be at University of Michigan too for about 10 years. Then he moved to Cornell or to Columbia and then to Chicago. In his book, I believe the year was 1917 that the book was published. He had written, and particularly for me, an engineer, it held a lot of truth because certain words were very, very personal to me. He wrote, "We do not educate directly, but indirectly by means of the environment. Whether we design environments for the purpose or whether we let chance environments do the job makes a big difference." This, as you can say, it is in me. I have never forgotten that. And the more I start thinking about educators, whether you're a department chair or a faculty member just teaching in a class, or you are a provost or a president, his words are so true. You are educating by means of the environment. You don't have to come to college. You can be in a different environment and you still gain knowledge and benefit from being in that. So Jan, it's all of us are designing environments. And in John Dewey's words, we are designing environments with a purpose. So how can we be educating students to be successful after they leave the university if the university environment, to a certain extent, to the best it can, not reflect the world that they're entering? All the book knowledge that they can get, and increasingly it is becoming true that you really don't need the chalk and talk, the professor. It's, the things have changed. But what they get is that experience, the peer-to-peer learning, the experience, you learn from the experiences of others. You try to put yourself in the shoes of others. So as an engineering and design is my area, I don't do that anymore. We are always focused on problem formulation. The focus is not so much on the solution, but appropriately formulating the problem. Because if you don't formulate it correctly, the solution is going to be incorrect. And that's why you see oftentimes so many well-designed engineering solutions, when they go to the field, they don't work because it's different than what you had in the lab. So education to me is also, we are designing environments in the best ways possible to educate directly and indirectly through peers, through the students who come to us. And age doesn't matter. Age really doesn't matter. So that's how I look at the work of diversity. So it is intricately tied to higher education. And the last thing I will say is, that is why when I was provost at Purdue, I made the case to the president and to the board of trustees that the provost, chief academic officer, and the chief diversity officer should be one and the same, if one can do it. And they agreed with me. They said, yes, we see your argument. And that is the time, and it is still there today. If you look up the website, you will provost, chief academic and diversity officer. That was something that I created at Purdue because I fundamentally believed that that is how it should be. These are not two separate roles. These are two sides of the same coin.
So, Jan, you didn't give me a chance to respond to your previous question. So I'm going to do that and then also try to get to this one. So you asked something about
score. I see.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know it's a conversation, but I unmuted and went unnoticed. But so you asked a question about if a prerequisite for engaging in this work was sort of, you know, identifying a certain way. And I would say, first, anyone can find a way to engage and support diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think to Rob's point, holding some minoritized identity can help, but only if the person is also engaging in that perspective taking and critical sort of empathy to think beyond your own experience, right? And to the provost's point, there's a lot of research on these positions where typically what happens is there is a person of color working in a company or maybe in a university, and they get given this role or this work, and they've never studied it, and they haven't really put in any thought to it. And it's a way of keeping them away from the formal decision-making processes in the organization. So then I will add that for me, I want this work, and I think this is designed at U of M-Flint to be meaningful and impactful. So those are worst case scenarios, and this is something better. So, I mean, I think Chancellor made a good case for DEI in higher ed. There's all sorts of rationale that people can use, right? So there's a moral case for it. It is the right thing to do. When these institutions started for historically white colleges and universities, they typically were somewhat exclusive, right, in different ways. And so I often look at, we have an intercultural center, we have a Center for Gender and Sexuality, Center for Global Engagement to help support international students. And that is in part an institutional recognition that we need to better support these students. And I think that's less surprising when you think about when the university was formed, they weren't thinking about these students. So I can, and Rob can speak more about Ann Arbor, but I know like Trotter, Multicultural Center and Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, these were responses to student activist movements. And the same is true of the Intercultural Center here. So there's a moral case, there's a business case, there's research showing the, you know, obviously Rob mentioned that diverse teams make better decisions. Those often translate to more profit in a for-profit company. And there is also an educational case. So not only is the school environment preparing students for the world outside, but engaging with those diverse perspectives in classrooms creates a more academically rich environment. So, I mean, there's tons of reasons, and for, you know, whatever resonates with people, get them on board. And I hope that eventually we're all on the same page for where we're going with this.
So I will just say, David, you took every possible area in which universities benefit from DEI, with the exception of the one. And I'll use my favorite quote, and it's by Horace Mann. And when Horace Mann wrote this quote, he wasn't talking about people of color. He was really talking about poor people. And what he said is that education beyond all devices known to man is the great equalizer of the human condition, the balance wheel of the social machinery. And that is the benefit. That's another benefit of higher ed institutions as it relates to DEI work, is that it serves as an equalizer. And taking my own lived experience as an example, growing up poor, parents, neither of whom had a high school degree, and so certainly they didn't have a college degree, rural, just all of the isms you can think of was a part of my lived experiences. But my father always believed that college, that is the equalizing force. Despite the color of your skin, despite your gender, despite your socioeconomic level in which you were born in, education is that great equalizer. And that is why I love education so much. That is why whenever I sit on that platform or I attend any graduation ceremony, I get filled with emotion, because education offers the promise to a better future. And without it, many of our students, irrespective of their racial ethnic identity, they are limited in terms of the extent to which they can benefit from this American dream. And I think education is one of the greatest social justice engines that we have in our country. So.
And you're thinking of education in this really broad sense, not just in the classroom, but as the Chancellor alluded to, in all the spaces of the institution. Yeah, how we do everything that we do. So a little more about how we institutionalize, because I think that's when the Chancellor was talking about combining the role of provost and CDO, I was thinking that is a prelude to institutionalizing, these principles. So is there a roadmap for that? How do we? Because that is a goal, I assume. That is a goal, to institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So let me first say, what I did at Purdue was for Purdue. David and Sonja, I'm not trying to do anything here.
Okay,
Please,
we're not, okay. No,
let me go on the record. That is not what I'm saying. But it is important. So it was important at Purdue. It was. It's a different institution, different demographics, different external forces. And the president is the former, still is the former governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels. I was his first provost, selected through an open national search. But the point I made, I still believe in, that it is not a different work. If you are promoting education, you are promoting diversity. It is not separated. So that's all I was saying. To your point, institutionalization, absolutely. Here I'll draw upon my 20+ years in Ann Arbor. I started, and I have seen 4 presidents, okay? And the pendulum swings. We make progress under one president or a certain period of time. How much impact the president or the administration had is not what I'm saying, but I have seen in my 32 years, the pendulum just at one institution, highly recognized for good work in diversity. But if you look at the numbers, you will see. So I believe that institutionalizing is the first step. That in and of itself will not get you there. The numbers might change, but if it is not institutionalized, if it is not a policy or an established practice, then you are really on shaky grounds, because then you are proceeding on the whims of the administrators who are there. Somebody wants it, somebody wants it less, and so on and so forth. So we have to, and I've been saying, I've said this to you, Jan, I've said this to David, anything that we come together and create for U of M-Flint, we should find ways to institutionalize it through a policy or a guideline or so forth. And then future administrators, at least they have a roadmap, or if they want to change it, they'll have to go through the process, make the arguments why they want to change it. So, yeah.
So let me speak a little bit to what we're trying to do here in Ann Arbor, and Deba has mentioned it and referred to it. So we've just completed our 5th year of our DEI strategic plan. The goal all along was we wanted to recognize the fact that our goal is fundamental, long-term, sustainable institutional change. And the best piece of advice that I got was from my mentor when I first took the job. And he said, Rob, understand 2 things. First, that it took the University of Michigan Ann Arbor 200 years to be the institution that it is today. And it's not going to change overnight. And don't let anyone let you believe that or hold you to that standard when it has taken that long. And then the second thing was, and again, anyone who knew my mentor knew there was some colorful language in there. He also said, make sure that you make people do their job. Don't do everybody else's job. They're not going to give you their paycheck. So don't do the job, make them do the job for them. To me, that has meant that we have tried to take an approach where we've gone from DEI as a contested argument and a contested perspective. 5 years ago, if you're on the Ann Arbor campus, and you wanted to make the case that we should be doing something, DEI, whether it's in a department, et cetera, you had an argument. And you're going to have a debate. Is DEI really central to what we should be doing? We're really about excellence. Diversity is ideology or a moral perspective, but what we really want is to be objective, et cetera. And some places you'd win the debate, and other places you wouldn't, but there would be a debate. We wanted to move from that debated concept to having DEI be a core value, something that's adopted as a core value of the institution. And one of the things that I can tell you is that it is now a core value of the institution. That anywhere on our campus, first and foremost, you say DEI and everyone knows what DEI is. Second, the argument, there's all kinds of arguments around DEI, but the argument isn't over whether or not we should do it. In fact, if you believe we shouldn't, then you're probably feeling uncomfortable making that argument. We have all kinds of argument about what we should be doing and whether we're doing it the best way or fast enough, but never should we be doing it. And that's a huge cultural change. And this is what that ultimately is. But our ultimate goal is to move from a core value to the point in which it is standard operating procedure. And in some places we've made progress there. In other places we still haven't quite gotten there, but we've attempted to, and our goal is to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a value and standard operating procedure in the same way, for instance, that being good stewards of the public funds is a standard operating procedure in everything that we do. Every single unit in our at the university, we want everybody thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that they're doing. So as you're making decisions about curriculum, you should be thinking about it in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you're making decisions about procurement, you should be thinking about it in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're making decisions about development. You should be thinking about it in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the goal is not to change attitudes with the hopes that it will change behavior. Because as a psychologist, one of the things that we know is attitudes don't change behavior. It's actually the other way around. Behavior change attitudes. So while I would hope that in your heart you would adopt a more equitable view, I'm more concerned about whether or not you're acting in ways that are more equitable and more inclusive. And over time, you'll be surprised. You'll begin to see it, or you'll leave. And you know, fundamentally, if that's what the ethos of the institution is, then that's what happens. People either gravitate and see it as something that they want to be a part of, or they decide that they don't want to be a part of it and leave, but they usually don't change. And so this is something that's going to happen, not in our 5-year plan. So we're going to do another 5-year strategic plan. And we're going to move the ball even further from what we've done and make huge changes. And after that, hopefully we'll do another 5-year strategic plan. So our vision is looking at DEI strategic plan in the same way that we look at our capital campaigns. So we have a time period with a set of goals that focuses our activity and galvanizes the community in a particular direction and with the goals of accomplishing. But at the end of that point, we don't say we're not going to collect any more money. We collected all the money that we need for the University of Michigan. We're always constantly in a period of going towards a capital campaign, and then in between where you're planning and assessing what worked, what didn't, and refocusing where the next strategy is. And that's the goal for DEI in the future. So basically, it has to be about long-term sustainable change that doesn't just happen in the DEI office, that just doesn't happen under the watch of the Chief Diversity Officer. It has to happen in every person's job on campus.
So Rob, I'm glad that you brought up the behaviors changing attitude piece, and I think it connects with what Chancellor Dutta was saying, right? So when we change policy, so we look at the institution as we are, right? And we are saying one of our goals is to increase the diversity of the faculty, student, staff. We got where we are by doing what we've done, right? So we are looking at policies and saying, where are these policies not promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we change those policies that then change the practices and the norms? And as the norms change, then the campus culture, right? The policies and the culture are sort of in a reciprocal relationship where they evolve together. So this broader goal of culture change involves really looking at how we're doing things and ways that we might be excluding intentionally or unintentionally.
And let me throw another P in there, and that's programs. So programs come in when you don't have policies, practices, procedures that are already in place, but programs can address things that are outside of things that can be changed simply by the policy practice. So programs have a role, but programs are not, and I also want to go on the other side, programs are not by definition long-term institutional change.
And it's really interesting to me as a psychologist, and as I'm listening to you, Dr. Sellers, I'm also a psychologist, and I can tell you're a behaviorist because it's almost like this Nike slogan, just do it. And through the behavior change, then people's attitudes will change. I still believe in cognitive behavioral therapy because I think cognitions impact the way we feel, impact how we behave as well. So, but I do appreciate that. And I will say that one of the ways in which I expanded my knowledge about the ways in which to diffuse the innovation of diversity, equity, and inclusion is by modeling your work, Dr. Sellers. So I want to just say thank you, because you were a roadmap that gave many of us throughout the country guidance on how to do this work, do it well, and diffuse the innovation. And it harkens me back to my HIV, STI, and pregnancy prevention work, because it made sense when I connected DEI work to the work that I did with HIV prevention. And we used this model called, it was the Diffusion of Innovation. And we would use key informants, key stakeholders to help us to diffuse the innovation in really meaningful ways that pertain to those different audiences. And so your model was the use and inclusion of, the different colleges, academic units, and units in general, and having that key informant that creates this structure within those units to diffuse the innovation in ways that were meaningful and sustainable and relevant to that environment, realizing that what exists and what makes the most sense in CHS, giving a shout out to Dean Fry and all the excellent work that she's doing. It may be different for our School of Education and Human Services. So I'll stop there, but yeah, thank you for this conversation. It's helpful and very provocative as well. So thank you.
So are there challenges that you've encountered, or that, I don't know, that persist in trying to get this work done in institutions of higher ed? And I know, it's dangerous to generalize, because challenges vary from institution to institution, perhaps, but maybe there are some themes, or concepts that are common.
So I'll start, and I hinted at it, but the way that we've done things is how we got where we are. And so when you're looking at institutional change, it implies that we could be doing things better, which obviously we can. And sometimes the way that is received, people might be offended by it or upset by the suggestion that they weren't doing, as in particular, when it relates to DEI, there's a sensitivity to being considered racist or sexist or homophobic when looking at ways to better serve students of color, LGBTQ students, et cetera.
I think there are lots of different challenges. We might be here for a very long time. So to piggyback on David's point, one of the things I think about when you're talking about systemic change is the first thing I learned about systems is the number one goal of a system is to recapitulate itself. And so there's naturally resistance. On the flip side, that's also the greatest hope, is that if you can change the system and the system is recapitulating yourself in the ways that you want it, it can also be self-reinforcing in terms of that change. But one of the challenges that I've faced that has been most difficult for me during my time in the position is what I like to refer to as living on multiple levels of time. So I'm very clear the long-term goal of what we're trying to do is systemic change. And it's interesting, at the end of our 5-year plan, for some people, 5 years is a very long time. That's the entire breadth of their time at the university. For some of our youngest students, 5 years is a third of their sentient life. On the other hand, I've been connected to the University of Michigan for more than 27 years. So 5 years isn't quite as long. I've been through 4 different presidents as well, Deb. And you put it in the context of the 200 plus years of the university, 5 years is nothing. So living at one level where it's going to take time and having the patience and the long view necessary to see change. So when you're talking about change in hiring faculty, particularly tenure track faculty, whose average lifespan at an institution may be 30 years, and the turnover is relatively short, that's a long space. On the other hand, when you're talking about the experiences of students who are going to be gone very quickly, and the ebbs and flows of that change in the short run, for them, things aren't getting better. Things are often getting worse. So if you see that line where you're going up, it may be going up, but that volatility, they're living that volatility. And it's also my responsibility to address how they're experiencing the world right now. So it's living both with weather and with climate. And sometimes the two of them are unrelated. And other times they're not only related, but they're related in opposite ways. Because the more progress you make, sometimes the more volatile the ride is. And so living and trying to act at both levels is one of the biggest challenges that I faced in my time in the position.
I will add that we can all admit that with the political climate that we have faced in the not so distant past, it really has amplified the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I can remember this one particular book that a colleague shared with me. It was called Confident Pluralism, Bridging the Divide in Times of Deep Divide. And what I appreciated about the book is that, and I took heart the responsibility of the work, is getting students, because even though we only have students for a short period of time, 4 to 6 years, the goal is that when they leave the academic institution, that they are more informed citizens, and that they think about issues, not just in their profession, but they think about things in general, more and more complex ways. Also, giving room that maybe their perceptions might be wrong, maybe there's additional information to add to what they're thinking, and understanding ways of meeting in the middle when there is a divide. And so I think, to me, I see the work that we do in higher ed as positively impacting the human condition beyond the academic experience. Because when students leave this university, I want to believe that they're better citizens, that they encounter differences in a different way, and that they strive to reach across the aisle to try and understand people better. Dr. Sellers, you talked about perspective taking, which I think is critically important. And I think getting students to think about other frames of reference other than their own, having empathy and humility in ways that they didn't have it prior to coming to college. And that goes above and beyond what they might learn in the classroom. And so that's one of the reasons why I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important, is because our students will make this world, or help to make this world, a better place. They are our change agents, not only now, but in the future. So
Jan, let me add, just something very briefly here. You asked, what kind of challenges have you faced? Once again, I have to go back to the time I was a grad program chair and at NSF. You know, the simplest thing used to be, but we are all about quality. So quality, at least in the engineering world, is very quantitative. You look at the GRE scores, you look at the GPA, you look at this. And so how are you making the case for this candidate to be admitted with assistantship over another candidate? Similarly, because I was the graduate program chair, all the PhD qualifying exams that we have every semester used to be something that I had to handle. You know, it's like, I remember this case, and it was a female student who came to me and said, and so now we are talking 25 years ago, and she's saying she has anxiety about taking exams. And she said to me that, look, I know the material, but if I take the exam like a PhD qualifying exam, it's not going to go well. Well, she took the exam and she did not succeed. Her advisor came to me and said, look, Deba, and these are, like as I'm saying, I'm repeating, this is long time ago. The system that works is very codified. You take an exam, you pass 3, you're out. There is no question about it. I remember how long I spent on that one case, talking to other faculty, trying to understand what it is. And then I took it to the graduate program committee saying, this student deserves another chance and in a different format, that instead of a written exam, she will be given her entire exam oral, a verbal exam. No, my colleague said, no, you cannot do that. And that is where I did. I overwrote the entire committee and I said, as graduate program chair, I'm going to give her that opportunity. I had spoken to the department chair. He and I were on the same link. Okay, she took the exam, she passed, she flourished as a student, a PhD student. She graduated, she joined a R1 institution, and last month she got her tenure. And the faculty member who is still in mechanical engineering, who was one of her co-advisors, wrote to me, hey, Deba, do you remember that you had taken this step? She is now a tenured faculty at a prestigious institution. And he ended by saying, that was the first indication of diversity work in mechanical engineering. I'm saying this because I felt I got emotional. I had completely forgotten about this. But this faculty member who is still here, he related it all back. So the point is, you are always faced with, okay, here's the policy and so forth, so you can't do anything beyond it. Well, if that's all you do, then you're not thinking about the world in a way that needs change. So what I used to face, and I think I still face, is we are all after quality. Well, define quality for me. Tell me, now we are not taking in standardized tests because we have figured it out, finally, that there are many students, A, who are disadvantaged, B, who have capacities that are not quite measured in a test. But at the end of the day, when you are out in the real world, you're working in teams, you're working in groups, you're making things happen. You're not going into your office and taking a test, right? So these things also have to be thought through. And these were challenges that I faced. And sometimes I was able to overcome, sometimes the committees overruled me. And I think those challenges are still there with us. It's very basic as to, we are only after quality. We hire only quality people. Well, okay, let's have a discussion. Let me see how you can argue about quality without taking into account so much about the individual that is not translatable to numbers, you know, so.
Yeah, I think you've just offered a dramatic illustration of inclusive excellence, right? We add that qualifier. I use that term all the time and I feel it, but I don't know that I am comfortable talking about it confidently. But that's such a great example of inclusive excellence. Yeah. And equity, right? You provide the booster that someone needs to take advantage of the opportunity that exists. It's great. Yeah. We are about 10 minutes away from our scheduled close. So I think this might be a good time to just ask you to offer additional insights or comments. You might want to.
I just want to affirm one of the comments that I saw come through the screen when Chancellor Dutta was speaking, and referenced learning differences or people that are differently abled. Because the reality is that diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is very broad. It is not just racial, ethnic. It's not just LGBTQ. It is not just any one thing. It reflects difference overall. And so thank you, Chancellor Dutta, for referencing learning differences and the ways in which, in that instance, you encouraged an examination for the student that had a difference of learning. She wasn't less capable. Her learning, the ways in which she conveyed her knowledge was just different from other students. So thank you. And it just amplified the fact that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is very broad. It might, Dr. Sellers mentioned being middle-aged. It's about ageism and age discrimination. It's about people's accent or their religious affiliations. And so, we've seen a lot of xenophobia associated with the COVID pandemic. And so it's mitigating those issues of bias, those issues of inequities associated with differences that are unfair, unjust, unwarranted.
So I want to also pick up on Provost Feast Price's point and Deborah's point as well. For me, when I think about whether it's inclusive excellence or diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that one of the frames that I have learned that is most powerful to me is thinking about if you changed, in the context of structural bias, if you changed who was doing it at the beginning, who determined the policy, the practice, the procedure, and how it would look different. And one of the most vivid examples is one that we often talk about in the context of thinking about access, and particularly access in the disability space. So if you had limited funds and to cover the shoveling of snow, which we all can relate to, and you could only shovel the stairs or you can only shovel the ramp, but you couldn't do both. And you had 300 people that had to get into the room. And of those 300 people, 298 of those people could use the stairs and 2 could only get in through the ramp. What makes sense? I will tell you, my first coming to that problem was like, oh, well, that's pretty easy. It's got to be you shovel the stairs. I mean, that's the best use of funds. That's equitable, because that means more people are able to, you know, there are limits to what you can do. When in reality, the answer is actually you shovel the ramp, because if you shovel the ramp, all 300 people can get in. And not only that, but if those 2 people that could only get in with the ramp had the knowledge that you need once you're in there, having all 298 people in there didn't do you any good without those other 2 people. And so reframing, getting away from this notion of when we're at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor or Flint or Dearborn, of having policies and procedures that are designed to help the typical Michigan student or the typical Michigan faculty or the typical Michigan staff member. Getting away from those policies and start creating policies, procedures, and practices that are designed to aid all Michigan students, all Michigan faculty, all Michigan staff. That's when you end up getting inclusive excellence. And it not only, again, helps those folks who traditionally have been left out, but perhaps even more important, particularly in spaces where you have diminishing resources, it helps the entire community. That's where the excellence is from. It's not out of a handout. It's not out of the morally right thing to do. It's not even out of the socially just thing to do. And I believe in all of those things. But the bottom line, when resources get tight and folks start looking for what is mission critical in higher education, and I would argue in just about any other industry, but in higher education in particular, being able to bring to bear all of our excellence is what is required. That's what's mission critical. Anyone that's left behind not only is a loss for them, but it's a loss for all of us.
I've got 5 minutes.
I just wanted to react a little bit to Chancellor Dudda's story also, because I think it provides a good example of how he leveraged his privilege by virtue of his position to advocate for a student who might not know how best to advocate for themselves. And then it also points to, so that's the individual instance, but then for students afterwards, I think the challenge is to look at, is there a way that the department can consider offering different modalities for qualifying exams so that going forward, students who may learn differently aren't encountering the same obstacle? And so I think that's sort of the nature of the work.
Yes, absolutely right. And I don't know, I will, you know, I want to have some conversation with my friend who is still in Ann Arbor and see what changes have happened in the last 20 years. But since we are getting to a close, I honestly do not have any closing comments other than to thank all the panelists for a wonderful, wonderful conversation, which we all know we could have had for another couple hours and still be as energized, at least me, like throwing the hands up, because this is what it is. As I said, this is higher education. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the committee, the DEI committee, and the good work, and my participation and help from Ann Arbor with Rob and everyone else is much appreciated. So those are my closing comments.
We still have 3 minutes if anyone wants to.
I will just say, I got to go back to what David said about privilege or power and privilege. And, you know, for me, I I use the words, to whom much is given, much is required. That's really how I live my life. And so when we are privileged to be at the table, it is incumbent upon us to use our privilege and our power for those that are not at the table. And so I just really want to echo when David referenced the chancellor's example about his use of privilege. And I just have to say amen to that point, in that is what equity is about. That is what social justice is about. And we all have that opportunity and that responsibility. I remember a colleague of mine, she always knew the right thing to say, but she wouldn't say it. She would look at me and she would wink her eye as to say, Sandra, go on and speak to this issue. And I would say to her, I'd say, you know what? All of our voices are needed at the table. And while granted, I will say what I need to say, I will do what must be done, but you have a responsibility as well to use your privilege and your power to bring attention to these issues, because there are times when people might hear her in ways that they wouldn't hear me. And so I just want to say amen, and thank you, David, for emphasizing the importance of leveraging our privilege and our power to do this very, very important work of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So, Provost, you answered the question that I didn't get to ask, and that is, what is our role in this, who are not leaders at the institution? It is to have a voice, to use our voices. Yeah, this has been so exciting.
Yeah,
yeah.
Jan, if I may, I just want to thank you, thank Chancellor Dutta, Provost Feast-Price, Dr. Sellers, all of my colleagues that shared some of the things they're working on. I want to thank Mai Lee, who learned how to host a Zoom webinar for this, and it's gone really well. So just thank you all. Jan, I don't know if you have anything else. I think the Provost's comments really wrapped this up quite nicely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, my final notes say, great conversation, thank you.
And thanks to the over 100 attendees that we had engaging in this conversation as well. So thank you all.